Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Welcome back to the Daily Dose of Doom and Gloom. Today on the channel, we need to talk about the hidden messages in the Russian military parade, Putin's declaration of war on the West in that military parade. We need to talk about the UK sending long-range missiles, marking a major escalation, as well as troops in order to direct those missiles to Ukraine. We have US drones getting very, very close to Russia. We have the Russian media saying that nuclear war is inevitable. We have the nuclear power plant, which has been evacuated. I got an emergency alert on my phone today. I want to talk about that whole system a little bit in more detail today. We need to talk about the F-22s that the US just sent to Estonia, just outside the Russian border, likely to face off with Su-35s when World War III kicks off. We have a major escalation in the $1.2 billion weapons package. The media is not connecting the dots on this one, and this one is going to mark probably the biggest escalation since the war began. We have the Ukrainian commander Zaluzhny, which has gone AWOL, likely just planning the counteroffensive in secret, but mysteriously didn't even have a virtual presence at the recent NATO conference, which is unusual. Some people speculating that maybe he was taken out in a missile strike, but I'm quite certain that that was not the case. However, we will talk about it. We have Russia withdrawing from another weapons treaty with Europe, marking, you guessed it, a major escalation. We have nuclear detection aircraft over the North Sea doing weird flight patterns. We have peace talks now impossible, according to the UN chief Anthony Guterres. We have Poland renaming a Russian territory, that is Kaliningrad, marking, you guessed it, a major escalation. We have civil war in Pakistan, shit's hitting the fan in Israel and the Gaza Strip, and the border crisis with Mexico is just reaching incredibly dangerous levels. So, where do we start? Well, let's start with the Russian Victory Day parade. This is being misinterpreted by the moronic majority of people, as per usual. Not you guys, you're the independent, self-reliant, preparedness-minded types. So I'm not referring to you, obviously. That's why you come here, for an alternate viewpoint. What people are chalking this up to be, and I'll explain the controversy for you. The Russians demonstrated a paucity of military equipment in today's Victory Day parade, or yesterday's Victory Day parade. And many people have taken that to basically be that they don't have the military equipment available to put on display in these military parades. I'm going to explain why that is nonsense. Number one, military parades are typically put on in the spirit of the principles of the art of war to appear strong when you're weak. So a lot of countries will put on military parades. North Korea comes to mind, when they're weak, in order to show, in order to intimidate, okay? The fact is that if you are very strong, like a country like the United States, for example, you don't see them having a lot of military parades. In fact, I believe I did a video several years ago that said that when the United States starts having military parades, you know the empire is collapsing, because it's a way of kind of puffing up your feathers, so to speak. However, right now, as the Russians are fighting a conflict, many people are chalking up the lack of military equipment as indicating that they somehow lack the equipment to put on display at all, which is complete nonsense. We showed videos a couple days ago of the Russian Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu, inspecting hundreds of new Russian tanks. They have tons of equipment, thousands of vehicles that they easily could field in this military parade, but it's quite symbolic that they chose not to do so. And that's quite telling, because if they were weak, this is something they would want to do. They would want to put on a big demonstration, in spite of any potential security risks that might accompany it. They would have wanted to put on a very big show if they were concerned about their image. The fact that they were not, and they only fielded one tank, one lone tank that's going to be coming up here in this procession, should be quite concerning to people, because what that means is that they are fully committed to the pragmatic and strategic aspects of this war, as Putin even referred to it this time around. And I imagine that if they did field 500 tanks, if we flip the script and we follow that line of thinking, that rationale that out of sight, out of mind. If it's there, then that means they have it. Would people be freaking out if the Russians had this grand military parade? Would people be really worried that, because of course some people have not transcended what they call in psychology the object permanence developmental phase. It's a cognitive phase that infants go through when basically if you play a game of peekaboo with an infant, the infant thinks that I've disappeared when my hands are in front of me, and it thinks I've reappeared simply by virtue of being in visual range. Just because something is out of sight doesn't mean it ceases to exist. But unfortunately, in the moronic majority who is so impressionable and only led by their senses and can't seem to think for themselves, they actually believe that just because the Russians only fielded this one tank that you're seeing behind me here, that means anything but that the Russians are taking the war more seriously and they're less concerned with PR. Understand that in 1941, when the Germans were beating on the door of Moscow, getting ready to basically take over the country, the Russians had already cleared out all their government offices. They were getting ready to basically concede Moscow. Stalin decided to have a military parade. This had the effect of boosting morale. Against the advice of his advisors, he decided to go through with this military parade, which galvanized people to defend Moscow and actually was one of the factors that turned the tide of the war. So you're talking about a situation where Russia has the means to put on a military parade but has chosen not to because, number one, they're not concerned about boosting morale, signifying that the population is ready to go the distance no matter what. You're talking about a population who in World War II lost 25 million civilians and military personnel in this conflict. I think that was like 1 in 5, possibly 1 in 4 of their population, maybe even more. So we cannot comprehend that level of sacrifice, okay? We cannot comprehend the level that the Russians are likely willing to suffer to ensure that their national sovereignty, as they view it, is not infringed. We have no frame of reference to comprehend that. They've barely scratched the surface of what they're likely willing to sacrifice in this conflict, with, even if you take the worst case estimates of a couple 100,000 guys, doesn't scratch the surface of what they are able to bring to bear in terms of manpower and reserves, which is around 25 million people of able-bodied males that are able to fight in a conflict. So this is a big nothing burger in my personal experience. This is just another indication that people on the internet, these lemmings, are going to herd us off this cliff into World War III. And unfortunately, because human beings are a herd species, we have herd behavior, herd mentality. If you try to go against the herd, what happens? Well, we've seen it happen all around the world when stampedes happen. And if you're not going with the flow of that stampede, you're going to get trampled. Unfortunately, dissenters, anybody who deviates from the primary narrative that's being pushed out on either side, is going to get trampled. And these are the people who are going to take us to the brink of nuclear war. And it's coming, and we're going to reach a point where we're going to be solely relying on whatever back channels exist between the Russians and the Americans to prevent this from potentially escalating out of control, because the fanboys, the cheerleaders on the sidelines, are so blind, deaf, and dumb that they can't see how this is going to end badly for all of us. Like the people who are starry-eyed and are looking for a Ukrainian victory and for the Ukrainians to take back Crimea, that's great if you're a patriotic Ukrainian. However, the rest of us have to worry about the global implications of what Russia will perceive that to be, and that's an existential threat to their national sovereignty. So that means that as soon as that happens, if and when it happens, that the risk of nuclear war has increased. In fact, a 4-star general of the American military recently said, and as you notice here, just as a sidebar, they still put the nuclear weapons in. So they only had 1 tank, but they kept the nukes in. That's a little hidden message there as well. But the 4-star general said that the Americans are actually concerned about the Ukrainians winning the war too fast, which is why they've limited the amount of military support. So they know exactly what I'm talking about. And a lot of these people who have been trained to completely underestimate, because they've been misled with this excessively very, very well concocted PR campaign that has minimized any sort of Russian victories and gains throughout this conflict and maximized the Ukrainian ones. And in order to boost morale, boost support for the conflict, unfortunately, this has the effect of taking us into very, very dangerous territory. We're not only underestimating our enemy, but we're also potentially going to bring ourselves to the brink of a conflict that nobody's going to win. Okay, so that's my little rant on the hidden messages of the military parade. But Putin, in that parade, made a declaration, basically, that the West, and of course this is how they're always going to frame it, and as you guys know, I don't do Russian propaganda or Ukrainian propaganda. He has, and the Russians are masters at language. If you actually listen to the Russians speak, like just their dignitaries, they have a mastery of language that I don't think is matched. Maybe they have a mastery of English that is second only to the English, I should say. And especially in terms of how they frame things, like the idea of a special military operation, the Z campaign, the Z propaganda campaign, and now this phrase that a war has been unleashed against Russia again. So you see how he uses the phrase war, but not that Russia are the progenitors of that conflict, that it is a war that has been brought against Russia. Anyways, he's used the phrase war, effectively saying that they are now at war with the West. This was a stark difference from what he said last year at that time. And he says, a real war has been released against Russia again, against our homeland, but we repulsed international terrorism. We will protect the inhabitants of Donbass and ensure our security. And what he says here regarding the troops fighting the conflict is very significant. He says, you honorably fulfill your military duty. You are fighting for Russia. Your family, children, friends are behind you. They're waiting for you. I'm sure you feel their boundless love. The whole country has rallied to support our heroes, and everybody is here to help. They are praying for you, the head of state stressed. And what this tells me is that this matches their fiscal spending for the year, in that this is a war economy. This is total war, and the entire country is mobilized to win this conflict by any means necessary, even if it means sacrificing millions of their countrymen. Again, we don't have a prism, a frame of reference in order to understand the Russian perception of war and protecting their borders. Like, we don't have any equivalent in our recent memory that can allow us to really understand what it might be like to live in that part of the world and have been invaded several times, which again is not an excuse or justification for Russia's actions in invading Ukraine, but we just simply cannot conceive of this, so we cannot conceive that level of sacrifice. For us, this is a war that's being fought across the pond. Yes, there are nuclear implications, but we don't have that affinity with the conflict, and every Russian has somebody in their history that died in that conflict, okay? So this is part of the memery, and this shows you that people really aren't that smart. Poland must be a stronger military power than Russia, according to this meme here, because Poland can put more tanks in the streets. Now, not only is that just quantifiably wrong, the Russian military, not only are they far superior to Poland's military in numbers, technology, the whole 9 yards, but they actually have a military that's bigger than when they started this conflict. So there's just a lot of disinformation, and again, these are the same people that dictated the policy of the last 3 years. This type of thinking, this people who are suspended in the object permanence level of cognitive development that most infants escape by the time they're like a year old. Most people are still, that's a level of critical thought, okay? Now, this is a list of This is the 2021 Russian military parade. This is what they fielded. So you can see there's a lot more vehicles. So obviously people are going to be questioning, well, why are they only sending out one tank? Well, I think I've provided reasons why. Okay, now the most important thing today, actually, let's talk about this guy, this lonely guy here. Russian radio host pressures Putin to change view on nuclear weapons. Let's see what he has to say. He says that nuclear war is inevitable. So he says, I firmly believe that nuclear war is inevitable. This is one of the chief Russian media pundits / propagandists. I am deeply convinced of this. I believe that we should withdraw from the treaty on a moratorium on the testing of nuclear weapons in all environments. This guy must have good security. We need to test nuclear weapons so the West can see that they exist and how powerful they are, and give an ultimatum to the NATO countries. Let's see what else he says. By targeting our nuclear strategic forces on government quarters and on launch sites of those countries that have nuclear capabilities, on the quarters of those countries that support the Nazi regime, remember this is Russian propaganda now, and put an ultimatum. If they don't want to hear it, that means there will be no more London, no more Berlin, no more Paris. So of course this guy is the hardest of hardline alarmists, sensationalists, no more Washington, D.C. That's my personal opinion. But we're going to talk about the reasons why we're getting incredibly close to an actual engagement, and this next round of military support may be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Okay, so where should we go next? Let's talk about Britain preparing to send long-range missiles to Ukraine. Now, part of the problem with this is, according to a Discord leak on Britain's plans, which has not been previously reported, signals that the UK could significantly increase its role in the war by sending Storm Shadow missiles, if that means also sending troops to help them with targeting. According to another leak, the British already have 50 special operations soldiers on the ground in Ukraine. So this sending of these 300-kilometer range missiles, which of course is drastically going to increase the reach of the Ukrainian military, allowing them to penetrate much deeper into Russia itself, although part of the agreement is likely going to be, hey, you can't use these on Russia, but we know how the mission creep typically tends to be with these things and how incrementalism works. First you get the missiles, then maybe you start using them for their originally intended and agreed upon purpose, and eventually maybe they just start firing them into Belgorod or other border towns, into Crimea, that sort of thing. But this will be make a big difference in the grand scheme of things, okay? And I think that the Russian strategy right now is they are preparing for the worst case scenario, and that means the United States sending all this heavy-duty equipment, possibly F-16s, long-range missiles, providing guidance, satellite, comms, support, all that, the whole 9 yards that we're going to talk about in just a minute here, because above and beyond that, yes, that is bad, but this is potentially even worse, okay? This is from Eurasia Times. Ukrainian air war, latest U.S. military package to Ukraine packs a lethal blow for Russia, provokes unimaginable escalation. This is where we're going to start seeing drones shot down, okay? Now, listen to this. Somewhat chillingly, with the assistance package, the U.S. has climbed the escalation ladder to a level where Russia may be forced to retaliate in a manner that could lead to a direct U.S.-Russia war with the potential to spiral out of control into a nuclear conflagration. In simple English, what this means is the United States is going to be sending a variety of different missiles, artillery rounds, and things like that, that the U.S. would provide Ukraine the equipment to use the situational awareness provided by U.S. and NATO AWACS, airborne warning and control system planes that are currently on patrol 24/7. Sometimes they're in, I don't think the AWACS are in the Black Sea, but they're always in Poland. So they're going to be sending the Ukrainians equipment that they can use the U.S. intelligence so they don't have to turn on their radars, and thus, because when you turn on your radars in order to either shoot missiles down or launch missiles, the Russians can see that and they immediately fire a volley of missiles to try to take those missile launchers. Oh, but this is the part, okay? So the AWACS patrol outside Ukrainian airspace and hence cannot be attacked by Russia under U.S. rules-based order. And the whole hiding behind NATO Article 5 thing, okay? Using the equipment supplied by the U.S., Ukrainian 80 forces will be able to cue their Soviet-era medium-range missile systems such as the S-300 and Bach using real-time AWACS targeting data. As a result, the Ukrainian systems can launch their missiles without switching on their search radars, thus essentially immunizing them from a counterstrike by the Russians, thus changing the game, okay? Potentially being another game changer. Now, that in itself, we have so many points of escalation right now. There was a drone that was circling in the Black Sea. You remember that drone, that Reaper drone that got taken down or shot down or got gasoline spilled on it, the RQ-4B Global Hawk? Well, one was in the Black Sea. In fact, two yesterday, which is very unusual, were in the Black Sea. And this was a rivet joint, so this wasn't a drone, that was actually a plane. But it got incredibly close to Sochi. As you can see here, Sochi is just like 20, 30 kilometers from there, from where this U.S. drone was. We're going to see another drone shot down, especially when, if and when the Russians get their backs up against the wall in Crimea, if this offensive actually is successful. That's how it's going to start, because the Ukrainians are not going to have to turn on their radars. That's going to minimize and limit the Russian air superiority in this conflict, which may actually, in fact, turn the tables and give the Ukrainians a fighting chance to actually take Crimea. Of course, when that happens, the Russians are going to, they already know this, but they're going to say, okay, well, you're using AWACS in order to guide your missiles, and so you don't have to turn on your radar. So we're going to have to target those AWACS planes. We're going to have to shoot down those planes. And right when you get to that point where they realize if they don't intervene in NATO's contribution to this fight, that they're going to lose Crimea, that's when we're at DEFCON 2 minimum, okay? That's when we're at DEFCON 2, because that's when they're going to start strategizing for the big conflict. Now, we don't know what they actually have, because our media, has it's so blinkered in its depiction of this conflict and so one-sided that we just simply don't know what the Russians have to bring to bear. We don't know how many tanks they have. We don't know what their air force is doing. We know that the Wagner Group has been doing the majority of the fighting, and it appears as though that the Russians are just digging in and getting prepared to hopefully exhaust the Ukrainian military in their last counteroffensive, absorb the counteroffensive, and then counterstrike. Because the Russians believe, and this is according to a lot of experts, that if they can withstand this current counteroffensive onslaught, then the West's support for Ukraine is likely going to wane and they will be victorious. That's what they think. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think that, the U.S. and NATO now are locked into this to the finish. And the only way this is going to end peacefully is if you end it along put a new Berlin Wall along the Dnieper River or something like that. So, where should we go next? The nuclear power plant. Okay, so Zaporozhye warns of catastrophic lack of workers amid Russian evacuation plans. They're evacuating the nuclear power plant because, of course, they're concerned that the people who are working there, they're going to get captured. And I mean, this is just going to be a massive problem. I've talked about how this is going to be top of mind in the news cycle for many weeks now, and it appears as though it's coming down to crunch time. There was a pushback. The Wagner Group got flanked today in Bakhmut, and I believe that the Ukrainians took, I think it was this section here, they pushed them back a few kilometers, and might have even been right here, which is contested territory as well. I don't know all the specifics on the ground, but there was a bit of pushback, and Prigozhin is having another freak out. He's referring to the, what does he call, asshole grandfather. That's what the Kremlin plays down Prigozhin's asshole grandfather. I think he's referring to Shoigu, but a lot of people are saying that he's referring to Putin there. But he did make this other comment on Telegram where he released a poll asking, whom would you vote for in the presidential elections today, Putin or Prigozhin? And you know, people said 39% would vote for him. Now, it's hard to know exactly what the relationship between Putin and Prigozhin is. Maybe he wants Prigozhin to be his successor. You just never know with these things, right? So it's very hard to say. Most people, as you can see here, there's another guy, I don't know who this is here, but Shoigu is not liked right now, at least among Prigozhin's followers. So if you don't know who that is, that's a Russian defense minister, probably getting a little bit too esoteric, but I'm pretty sure that my audience is up to date on a lot of these things. So NATO member summons Russian ambassador over serious international incident involving a fighter jet. So a Russian drone, I think, or not a Russian drone, a Russian fighter jet, it just says that, obviously. But they intercepted what was some kind of border patrol plane, I believe. It was not a military plane, but it was like a Russian NATO border patrol plane, and almost shot it down. And that could have, of course, been what invoked Article 4 and 5 and brought Russia to war with Poland. In addition to that, there's been a couple other things happening with Poland. One of their ambassadors was not able to lay flowers down at a Victory Day celebration in Warsaw. And you can see this guy here standing in front of the Russian diplomat. This is pretty customary. The guy goes, lays a wreath of flowers or whatever on the grave of wherever this monument is. And I'm almost wondering if this guy here actually works for the Polish special, secret services or something. Because if something ever happened to this guy, there would be trouble. Okay, so there must have been some controls in place to ensure that in spite of this resistance and these protests, that maybe there was like some cooperative, maybe it was co-opted in some way to ensure that nothing actually happened to the ambassador, because that would basically be the end of the road, I think, for Russian and Polish relations if something happened to the ambassador. In addition to that, there's more evidence that emerged to suggest that a Russian missile actually landed in Poland last year. We all know about the S-300, or you guys do anyways, about the S-300, but there was another incident last year, and they've concluded that it was in fact a Russian missile gone astray, okay? We also have a Polish decision to rename Kaliningrad. I believe they're going to name it something that it was historically called in Polish. And of course, I think the Russians are going to view this as foreshadowing, because we know that in and around this Kaliningrad region here, this is the exclave of Kaliningrad, that I believe they've put HIMARS right along the border. The Poles have put HIMARS. So they're almost bracing, and HIMARS are an offensive weapon, okay? So the Russians are concerned that the NATO is putting the pieces together for an all-out invasion, conventional invasion of its country. The renaming of Kaliningrad, is that some sort of weird foreshadowing that is happening there? And of course, Medvedev pushed back, and the tension is rising all over Europe, guys, which is why that's like typically the focal point of a lot of my recent discussions here on the channel. So we have the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, saying that both Kiev and Moscow are convinced they can secure a military victory, and therefore they're unwilling to compromise on the issue, essentially meaning that peace talks are impossible for now. We have Russia withdrawing from a European arms treaty that I don't think was being respected anyways, but this is now a formal official exit from the 1990 Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe, meaning we pretty much have no treaties left. I think the only treaty left is the nuclear testing treaty, which they're talking about abandoning now as well. The European People's Party says that Ukraine should be invited to NATO. So there's been this basically unanimity that Ukraine will be a member of NATO at some point, which of course would be the utmost of red lines, which is why we're having this war in the first place, because if Ukraine is in NATO, that means they can station nuclear weapons in NATO. That means they can station weapons deterrence systems, nuclear defense missile systems in Ukraine, which of course would just change the whole calculus of a European security, okay, and that's of great concern to the Russians. Retired NATO commander says the West is afraid of a Ukrainian victory. Retired NATO Supreme Allied Commander says Western fear of Russia using a nuclear weapon has prevented countries from offering decisive support. So they're trying to do this piecemeal. They want to defeat the Russians, but I think they would like to defeat them in an economic sense, in an attritional sense, where Russia collapses from the inside out. That's basically the best possible result for NATO at this point, is that Russia collapses economically, it collapses politically, and then it potentially breaks into, balkanizes into different countries, and then of course the West can go in and the multinational corporations can go in there and take over, all right? So Su-35 F-22 set for clash as Washington deploys its best warplane near the Russian border, and I believe that the F-22 is mostly untested at this point. Yes, it's got some pretty razzle-dazzle maneuvers that it can do, and it's pretty cool in air shows, but aside shooting down the balloon, I think that was the first time, and I could be mistaken about that, but I think it was the first time it was ever actually used. Never been used, certainly not in a high-intensity conflict with a peer military. But it's concerning because now you have the United States transferring a squadron of 5th-gen F-22 Raptors, and these are the best planes that the U.S. has, arguably the best in the world from a technical standpoint, to Amari Air Base near the capital is Estonia, Tallinn, according to the command of the U.S. Air Force in Europe. As noted in command, the planes arrived in Estonia from Poland to deter aggression in the Baltic Sea region. So these are not there for an exercise. These are not there for show. They're there for war. Okay, according to Russian intel now, this is Russian intel, Ukraine tried to attack Moscow 3 times on Victory Day. Well, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, any old drone, can be considered an attack. Italy is urging its citizens to leave Ukraine due to increased missile attacks on Kiev. What else do we got going on here? UK food prices skyrocketing. If you think you have it bad, the CPI is down a little bit today. In UK, it's 17%. And that's just what they're saying. Of course, it's a lot worse. Now, this was one of those nuclear sniffer planes. This was its flight path throughout the North Sea. We know there's been a lot of activity in and around the North Sea here. You've had a lot of Russian naval activity, and you've had a lot of live fire exercises being conducted by NATO. And now you have this plane, which I think detects nuclear explosions. It's called the Boeing WC-135R Constant Phoenix, as well as a Boeing C-17 Globemaster III, both flying very similar flight patterns, okay, over the North Sea, as if looking for nuclear submarines or something like that. But the amount of military activity in the skies right now, the open source intelligence guys are having a pretty good time trying to analyze all that stuff, because it's so numerous right now, it's almost become white noise, to be brutally honest. What else do we have to talk about today? Ukrainian commander offline. I think this is probably just a big nothing burger, kind of like when Sergei Shoigu went missing for a while last year because he was preoccupied doing other things. There has been some concerns that the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, the head guy, may have been killed in a Russian airstrike. And they're saying that because he didn't make any appearance at a recent NATO military summit, and not even by teleconference, that somehow means that he's not just indisposed with the war, that he's in fact been taken out, because who doesn't have time for a 1-hour Zoom call, apparently. But this Zaluzhny character, who knows? Who knows? I guess we'll find out. Maybe everybody's on the body double kick lately. Everybody's saying, oh, Putin wasn't at the parade, that it was a body double, and I think, you know, news agencies just lose credibility when they say that kind of dumb shit. I mean, let's get real. Going eastward, Japan is opening a NATO office, basically being brought into the NATO alliance. We have China furious that they're going to be deploying these missiles on an island in the south of Japan, which is going to be used when the war starts with Taiwan. Of course, the Chinese are also concerned that the U.S. is going to be providing $500 million in free weapons. And I'm to understand this as being kind of a sample so that eventually all these military contractors that went there, they're going to send them all these free weapons to train on, and then they're going to actually start sending the bigger billion-dollar shipments once they've been trained on all these weapons. And oddly enough, I know Warren Buffett is bailing on all his Taiwan investments, but the U.S. chip industry supplier Entegris has opened its largest factory in Taiwan. Now, did they start manufacturing in this factory long before all this craziness started? Probably, and they're just trying to see it through. Maybe they're getting ready to potentially jump ship as well. I'd say if they close that one, then we know that something big is definitely on the horizon. I got an emergency alert as well as my 1 million provincial country men and women today. And this is something that happens quite often here because, you know, in Canada, we have the emergency alert system on our phones. You know, you're in a Walmart or something or CanadianPreparedness.com store, and all of a sudden your phone goes off and everybody's phone goes off at the same time. And anytime I get these nowadays, I can't help but think this has something to do with what's obviously going on in the geopolitical front in the world. This was just a test, of course, but you just never know. Canada's getting involved in the war with China as well. They sent a diplomat home who was, I think he was harassing one of our MPs or something like that. I don't know all the details of it, but anyways, they declared him persona non grata, and China responded in kind. So now the war with China, between Canada and China, has taken a new turn for the worse as well. And I think they were justified in asking that Chinese representative to leave because they were harassing the MP, who happened to be Chinese here, I do believe, but I don't know all the details of it. Smoke from Canadian wildfires is being seen as far as the northeast, so if it's a little smoky today, that's coming from us. And unfortunately, we're going to see some record-breaking temperatures here in the next few days, which are likely going to fan the flames of those fires a bit more. Fortunately, I think some of them were put out by some recent precipitation, but they're all still raging pretty strongly. Did we talk about the hypersonic missile row? Yeah, so I'm not sure what to make of this. This is the missile that the Ukrainians found. This is a hypersonic missile, okay? This is the warhead. This is the missile, the delivery system. Some people are saying that this is actually contained within this, and other people are saying that these are obviously two different types of missiles. This is the Kinzhal missile. This is what the Kalishko was standing next to in the video that he was showing. And I'm not sure if this is even accurate depiction or not, but it doesn't seem like there would be a place for that warhead in here. I don't know much about this, but there's a lot of explanations. Even the experts are saying, even if this was a shoot down, considering the amount of Kinzhals that have been shot down so far, and depending on the speed it was going at the time, these can go up to Mach 10, which you're never going to shoot it down when it's going Mach 10. That's like 4 times the speed of a bullet, and you're trying to hit, 4 times the speed of a bullet with another bullet. It's almost impossible, especially considering as these things are maneuverable. So, if they did do it, and if it was the Patriot missile defense system that did it, if that's what they're trying to sell this as, then yeah, that's significant, because this is one of those potential game changers in Russia's arsenal that may have been nullified by the Patriot missile defense system. Now, realistically, I don't think anybody thinks that. I think that everybody knows that the limitations of these current missile defense systems, they don't have the capability to defend against hypersonics, but you just never know. You just never know. Maybe the Americans have been focusing on countering that as opposed to developing their own. Okay, so I think we've covered everything here. I don't know much about what's going on in Pakistan. I know Imran Khan, the last president has been arrested, and he has a lot of hardline grassroots supporters who are taking to the streets, burning down office buildings, burning down, palaces of various politicians in the country, and it's not looking good. It's looking like the country is on the brink of some major civil unrest, if not civil war. We have a situation going on in Israel where there's a lot of back and forth between Gaza and Israel. This is a video of the Iron Dome defense system at play. We have hundreds of rockets coming in from the Gaza Strip from Hamas being neutralized by this Iron Dome system, which appears to be quite effective, shooting down most, if not all, of the missiles sent their way. I'm not going to get into the border crisis stuff. There's a lot of politicking going on. That's basically everywhere in mainstream media, so there's plenty of people out there who know more about that than I. This is a map of the military facilities in Crimea. Okay, so this is where shit's going to hit the fan soon. So just stay prepped. I would encourage people, if you would be so kind, to go and check out our recent video we did with Gardening in Canada. We lay out how to basically build a garden from one year to the next. There were some clips that we had to omit from that to cut it down to size so that it was manageable for people. But I can assure you that she's probably fielded every possible question and grievance that you might have had with that video. There was some concerns about tomato blight, why you shouldn't put your tomatoes and potatoes next to each other, and she addresses that in a pinned comment on that video. Trust me, guys, you're not going to be able to stump this woman when it comes to gardening and questions. She's a certified soil scientist. She knows her stuff. So if there's something that she missed in the video, it's either because we had to edit it down so that it was palatable for people and just watchable, and because we try to make these videos so that the average person can just jump in and understand what's going on. And if you really start to take things to the professional level that she shows on her own channel, where she goes into great depth. I mean, there was some idiotic comments on there of people saying things like, she doesn't even garden. And I'm like, do you realize she has 500 videos? She has a farm. She's got cows. She has 3 or 4 gardens at once. So, I mean, anyways, I guess that's just the internet for you. But, I hate to say it, man, but the more I do this, the more I realize that most people, they're just more interested in hearing bad news. They're not interested in actually doing the work that it's going to take to prepare. And I don't know where that disconnect happens. I don't know how a person could listen to what I'm saying day in and day out and not be interested in taking practical steps. And maybe it's just that the content that we're delivering in that respect, that blue strip type content, maybe it just doesn't resonate with people, even though we put a lot into those videos, guys. Those videos cost a lot of money to make. Just like our store, we barely break even on those types of videos, but we put them out because it's important that we practice what we preach. And it's not just all doom and gloom. We actually have to get out there and do the work. And it's a lot easier to do now, and it can actually be quite enjoyable. I love going to the gun range. I love just doing prepping related stuff, learning about stuff. I love gardening. I love being out there hunting. I just love doing things that are preparedness oriented. But it seems as though there's this huge disparity between the amount of people interested in hearing bad news and the people who are actually interested in doing something about it. So I guess that means that there's going to be a lot of people who are just, who know what's coming, who are just not truly prepared for it. You can only buy so much stuff. Yes, having the stuff is a huge force multiplier, but you can only buy so much stuff. And I'm going to be having a lot of guests on the channel in the future, whether they're survival experts, whether they're people with a military background, Green Berets, people of all walks of life who are going to try to help us put the pieces together for the people who are truly serious now. I realize it's going to be a much smaller number of people, but we have a lot of good content coming for you guys. If you're not getting notified about the videos that provide more actionable information, You know, it might just be an algorithm thing, but they are out there. We put out about 2 a week, so I'd encourage you to go and flip through the catalog of videos that we have, and I'm sure you'll find something in there. Don't forget, you can support the channel by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com. This is a new multi-tool that I've been using lately. I believe it is called the SOG, what is it called? The SOG Flash HT. One of the few competitors to the Leatherman that I've found, because it's lightweight. If your EDC is not lightweight, one of these days you're just not going to want to carry it. I switched over from my Leatherman, what was this, the Free P4, because it's just heavy. If I got to run, if I got to do something, I don't want to be weighed down with all this stuff. So my kit, my EDC kit, is built to be lightweight. All I need is a good working pair of pliers with a nice mechanical advantage. I'm going to do an in-depth review on this. Maybe something with a knife. This knife actually is quick deploy, so it's, oh, I got it locked right now. There's a lock. So it's got that. Not that you need that. I don't really need that. But yeah, it's a cool device, lightweight, deep pocket carry clip. You can pick one up at Canadian Preparedness, and there's a drill bit on there as well. All I need really in a multi-tool for urban use is a good functional set of pliers with a mechanical advantage, a good knife, and maybe a drill bit or 2, and that's what this offers. If I'm going out into the bush, that's when I maybe get a Leatherman or a Swiss Army knife, because it has those other tools on there, like an awl or a saw or something like that. Speaking of which, wow, this video is going on long. Silky Saws just sent me some bad news. They're raising their prices another 20%. I can't believe this, man. They're raising their prices another 20%. Probably due to production costs, the cost of steel. So I don't know what it is. But yeah, so we're going to have, I guess, a pre-inflationary sale. And after that, I mean, Silky Saws are going to be very, very expensive. So I would encourage you to go and pick one up. The best saws in the world, bar none, come in all shapes and sizes. I would ensure you to get one, because you're going to need that when the shizzy hits the fizzy. You're going to have to find a way to procure firewood in a way which is not going to draw every zombie in earshot. Of course, zombies are a metaphor for desperate man-hunting cannibals. Guys, get your gear. Canadian Preparedness, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.